Hello, this is Linda Vettrus-Nichols, and do I have an amazing person to introduce to you, Carol Banens. Carol, welcome.
Thank you, Linda. So nice to be here.
Absolutely. So, you are a grief coach who says relish people. Tell us more.
Oh, I am. And you know why? Because I think once you're in grief and you've lost someone, you realize there's so much more that you perhaps could have done or wanted or appreciated about them. I remember, I'm a piano player, and when I was younger, my dad was quite a good jazz pianist, and he'd say, do hymns, play chords, it will give you chord sequences. And of course, I never listened because he was my dad. And after he'd gone and I ended up marrying a jazz pianist, I realized, oh, he was right. If only I'd done that. And then did I learn from that? Not enough. And I relished Brian, but not as much as I could. I think we can always do more. And after he'd gone, I thought, oh, why didn't I get him to teach me a really groovy happy birthday? Because, people say, can you play happy birthday? And it's like, no. And I know that's a silly little thing, but it's one of those things. That was his skill. He was a musician. Why didn't I tap into that? And part of it was because I was always too busy. I was too busy to smell the roses. I was working, I was looking after my mum and somebody else, and Brian, and running around,
Right?
blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't give you enough time to appreciate or relish those around you. And I
Yeah.
think it's so important because we're not here forever. We don't know how long we're going to be here for.
Right?
And so to take the time to appreciate who you have with you and why they're with you, and it's so important. And if only we could hear this lesson before they're gone so that we can do it
Yeah.
in advance, I think is helpful.
Wow. You know what's coming up for me is that Brian, the jazz musician, was your second marriage. And in
Yeah.
your second marriage, you tend to relish people a little bit more. So even in a second marriage, you can ramp it up and relish that person even more than you already do, right? Especially when you kind of find that love of real life. So
Yes.
cool. I
I
like it.
I think so. And I mean, it's, I relished him a lot. Like I was a very good
Yeah.
support.
I feel that way too. You'll find out you didn't. There's always more. I love it. Yeah, and what a double whammy of grief for you that your dad was a jazz musician and
Well,
you kind of
actually,
like re-lost a jazz
he
musician.
was actually a surgeon, but he was a very good pianist. And
I gotcha.
we used to play a lot of piano together, but he was a good jazz pianist. And yeah, so there was that lovely connection between my father who died and Brian. And but the music was lost to me after Brian
Yeah,
died.
yeah, but it was a double loss, is what I'm saying. And it's a not a but. It's a double loss if you think about like when we're talking for your grief.
Yeah,
That connection to music ended up being a double loss.
yes, it did.
Wow.
It did. I couldn't stand listening to it, and I loved his music. I was going to, I don't know, 4 gigs a week with him and helped him with his CDs. He has all these CDs. And it was just too heartbreaking for me because
Yeah,
music for me is a language. It's a language of love. It's a language of
very much. Yeah.
it means so much to me. And
Mm.
listening to his music when he was alive was just such a privilege and a pleasure. And it spoke to me, I just
Yeah.
spoke to my heart. And
Yeah.
without him, the music was pretty tough to listen to. I can do it,
Yeah.
but I don't do it a lot. I
Yeah.
don't.
I can see it because it's such a extra connection back to your dad too. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we just kind of covered link to each other, didn't we? It's all kinds of links. So yeah, so tell us more about linked to each other, Carol.
I think, we have these connections. And I just read a really interesting book called The Grieving Brain, and it's absolutely fascinating if you want to nerd out on brain science, which I love.
Me
And
too.
it talks about how we have a brain map for our loved one in our brain. Now, I'm very familiar with that as a physiotherapist, because if somebody has an amputation and then they say, but I
Yes.
don't feel my thumb and it's not there, it's because the brain map is still there of that body part. We have a brain map of that loved one in our head. They are almost they're wired into our DNA. So yes, we're linked. We feel this link. And one of the things I think important in grief that we understand better now is that having and maintaining a connection to the person we've lost is actually helpful to us. Many years ago, I think people were told, much probably like my parents, just, cut it off, don't pretend it never happened, don't think about them. And
Yeah.
connections, these continued bonds, as we call them, are really helpful because it feels like they've not gone. And they haven't, because they're wired in your brain, and your brain is looking out for them.
Yeah.
And you can come to a place of acceptance that physically, of course, they're gone, but there is more of a spiritual or a transformation of the relationship that you can keep a connection. And I don't think you have to be religious to have this linking. I think you can have that connection through photographs, through music, through memories or places. That connection, that linking to that person doesn't have to go because they're physically gone. The love doesn't go because they're physically gone. And I think that link is such an important part in helping you to move through your grief without feeling everything about them has gone.
Yeah, feeling all the negative things.
Yeah.
Grief is loss. You're lost, like what you have lost, and you want it, and it's not there, and there's so much to grief, including like a frustration and an anger, and then there's stages of grief too.
There are. So let's just touch on the stages of grief, because these were written, excuse me, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for the terminally ill, not for the grievers. This is really important for people to understand. So if I was suddenly given a diagnosis of cancer, I might, I'd be angry. I might deny it. I'm going to bargain and say, listen, if I give up sugar, will you just keep me around till my daughter's wedding next year? And then you've got, depression and then acceptance. And you can see how that would go with somebody who's terminally ill.
Right.
They were not written for the griever.
It's not linear.
Non-linear. And as grievers start to Google, as we do, Dr. Google, grief, the stages of grief come up. And I can remember that before I was a grief coach and I didn't know this. I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not bargaining. I was there. I know. There's no point bargaining. I'm not angry. I don't understand it. Am I doing my grief wrong? And this is a thing,
Wow.
right way of doing grief. And I think when people look at the stages of grief, they can get very caught up and think, oh my gosh, I haven't done this, so maybe I'm not doing it right. Just know, if you're listening to this, that it's a non-linear thing. You may go through some of those stages, but you may not go through them. You may go through number 4, and then number 1. It is a non-linear thing, and it is a unique journey, and there is no right way of doing it. So I just don't want people to get stuck on the stages of grief thinking they're doing their grieving wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Relish people, because those people are there for a reason, in your life, and what reason was it? Where did they fit? It's almost like a dance, right? And then when you don't have someone that's dancing with you, you're free to do a different dance. So that gets to be kind of a little mixed up too.
It's interesting, right? When we can think about, why are people in our lives? Who did we almost invite into our lives? What's the blessing? What's the lesson? What are they adding? What are you adding to their lives? Like it is. I love that. It's a dance. It's a dance. And for me, Brian added this absolute joy of music and brought me back to music. And he introduced me to some really wonderful people who are now my really good friends. He had this really interesting, he was interested in Eastern philosophy, in all sorts of interesting things in the news, and he brought so much to my life. He was so interesting and so challenging at the same time, and I adored that eccentricity in him. He opened me up to different things, and I think that's when we're with people, can we really think about, what are these people adding to my life? And the interesting thing I found with grief, or having moved through my grief a lot, is that you learn who you actually want to keep in your life and who you
Yes.
let go, and thank them for being in your life for whatever reason. But
Right.
some people you want to keep because you love being around them, and some
Mhm.
maybe not so much. And
Right.
that's okay. Think
It
about
is.
what's happened, and
Yeah.
bless them and send them on their way.
Yeah, and it comes down to that self-love piece too, which you're not going to get through grief if you're not super tuned into your own self-love. And I know it took me two marriages to really realize that, I didn't have self-love. So in this second marriage, we happened to be in like a high-end coaching program, that's when I learned I didn't know who I was. I didn't love myself, and there was a lot of growth. So just because you find the love of your life or somebody loves you, it's like it doesn't count. You get to do
Learn
your
it.
own work.
And I think, yes, you do. And I think that's another thing with grief. You have to do that inner work. You can't just wait. Time doesn't heal all wounds. You do have to do some work. And part of that work is self-love, self-compassion,
Yeah,
recreating your life. I mean, you were two people and you were very linked. And now it feels like you have had an amputation, like you have lost part of you. And who are you without that person?
right.
You have to redefine yourself. And that takes that work and that self-compassion and time for self-care.
Yeah, and I love the way you use the amputee example, because you've lost a limb yet you haven't, because it's totally there. You feel it, right? And
Yeah.
that's like having a baby, it's like they're here and there's this big bump, and then they're out here and there's this little person that's like, what? And death is the same way. I mean, I haven't sat at somebody's bedside, but I can just, correlate, at least in my mind, that that's that same what, they're here, they're not here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yet you still have the connection. So yeah, it's a
And going back to the brain again, the brain works on patterns. So, for example, if your partner would always come in at 6 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, your brain is still looking for that person to come through the door.
yeah,
And in that moment, you may have a grief burst where you're just overwhelmed by a moment of grief and not really know why. But it's partly your brain is searching. It's like they always come in at 6, so where are they? Why aren't they?
yeah,
Must come soon. So you've got this internal struggle in the brain for it to start to comprehend. Oh, no, they're not coming back at 6 o'clock.
yeah,
It's not happening. And so this struggle of acceptance of they're gone and they're not gone can take a while. And that's
yeah.
why, as we talk about our loved ones, as we talk about the people we've lost, it gives another layer of understanding to our nervous system that, okay,
Right.
coming back.
Yeah. And then there's the PTSD triggers. We don't need to get into that, but like my husband was in a car accident. The highway's not that far from our apartment,
Yeah.
and I heard all the sirens and stuff, and I had no idea he was involved in that accident, and then he was able to message me, and yeah, and my neighbor, we just have one car, so my neighbor went to get him, and he
Yeah.
couldn't even like get through. And so now when I hear
Siren.
ambulance or sirens, yeah, which I do all the time, because we're not that far from the fire station either. Yeah, it's still just that, like, where is he, even if he's like right there, I just have to throw a look, where is he right now? Yeah. So
Yeah.
whew, lots and lots involved in grief. So love
Good.
it how you teach on relish people. Thank you so much, Carol.
Oh, thank you so much, Linda, for letting me share this.
Absolutely. Bye bye.
Bye bye.